Welcome back to the Sage Audio channel. Today we're going to see what happens when we create a chain using the most expensive plugins. Will it sound good, mediocre, and will the expense of the plugins really have that much of an effect on the sound? So let's check that out, but first, if you have a mix that you need mastered, send it to us at sageaudio.com. We'll master it for you for free and then send you a sample of it. For the first insert, I wanted to use subtractive equalization, so I used the Weiss EQ1, which costs $549. With the Weiss EQ1, I subtracted some of the signal from both the mid and side image. I enabled the plugin's mid-side mode, then used the mid channel to cut out about 20 Hz and the side to cut out up to about 100 Hz. I cut a little more on the low mids on the mid channel and a little of the vocal range on the side to get the mid vocal to stick out more. This plugin has a really subtle but interesting sound. It's super transparent but somehow has its own sound, and I'm not sure how to describe it exactly. If it's worth $549, I'm not entirely sure, but it's worth a try nonetheless. Next up, I wanted to perform de-essing, so I used Weiss DS, which costs $199. Sticking with Softube's Weiss line, I used the DS to clean up some of the high frequencies and ensure that sibilance doesn't become a problem later on when the mix is amplified. I used the mid-side mode and only used de-essing on the mid channel. This way irrelevant high frequencies on the side image aren't affected. Then I lowered the threshold and set a small amount to keep the effect subtle. On the side channel, I ensured that no de-essing was occurring. For my third insert, I wanted to use dynamic subtractive equalization, so I used the Oak Sound Soothe 2, which cost $219. This plugin is really unique. It dynamically equalizes a range of frequencies, and it's great at reducing harsh sounds during mastering. Also, it's pretty expensive, so I thought I'd throw it into this chain. I used the soft setting and reduced the depth to ensure that only a little bit of attenuation occurred. I increased the sharpness and selectivity to make the attenuation very specific and used mid-side again to keep it only in the mid-channel. I maxed out the quality to ensure I didn't get phase issues and that the quantization was as accurate as possible. Then I isolated the attenuation to just the high frequency range. Let's listen to our first three inserts and then try to focus on how attenuating low frequencies on the side image and high frequencies on the mid image alters the timbre of the master.
Like the world was ending, when we pretend that it's alright, it's alright, it's alright. And if my mind is up in flames, would you stay with me through the night, through the night, through the night? Would you stay, would you stay?
For the fourth insert, I wanted to do tape saturation, so I used the U-He Satin tape, which costs $129. Although it's a little pricey, this is my favorite tape machine emulation plugin. To be honest, I really just used a preset that I thought sounded great and then changed some small things about it. I found that this one worked really well with the house-esque genre and brought out some pleasant textures and a slight lo-fi sound from the percussion. Next, I wanted some saturation, so I used the FabFilter Saturn II, which costs $154. I used a preset that I created by modifying the tube preset offered with the Saturn II. I broke the signal up into 4 bands and made the majority of the distortion and saturation program dependent, so the ADSR and amplitude of the incoming signal all greatly impacts the amount and timbre of the distortion. I mixed the effect in and used linear phase as well as the maximum amount of oversampling. Then I introduced additive EQ using the Chandler Curve Bender, which costs $299. Again, on this plugin I used mid-side mode and I unlinked the channels to affect them separately. On the mids I boost a little bit of the kick, the vocals, and the air. On the side I boosted the mids at 800 Hz and some of the air as well. I didn't notice all that specific of a timbre change from this plugin, but the goal here was to use the most expensive plugins just to see what happened. So let's listen to the last 3 inserts and pay particular attention to how tape emulation, saturation and distortion, and additive equalization really affect the amplitude and the dynamics of a signal.
Like the world was ending, when we pretend that it's alright, it's alright, it's alright. And if my mind is up in flames, would you stay with me through the night, through the night?
Next, I created a bus send for some parallel compression, and I used the Chandler Germanium compressor, which cost about $249. Softube seems to make a lot of expensive plugins, and the Chandler Germanium is no exception. With this compressor, I got a lot of grit and distortion out of the signal by using the dirty comp, the drive, and feedback settings. I balanced the output of the plugin while reducing the channel fader to ensure that the signal wasn't too powerful. Next, to create New York style parallel compression, I followed the compressor with the FabFilter Pro Q3, which costs $179, and I amplified aspects of the mid and side channels. I emphasized the kick, the mids and highs, and expanded the stereo image by amplifying the side image. I also stuck with a natural phase setting. Let's listen to our auxiliary channel and see how the New York style parallel compression affects the master.
Think the world was ending when we pretend that it's alright, it's alright, it's alright. And if my mind is up in flames, would you stay with me through the night, through the night, through the night? Would you stay, would you stay?
Next, I wanted to use some compression, so I used the Weiss DS1 Mark III, which costs $549. So going back to the Weiss plugins, I used this one for very subtle compression. Using one of Bobcat's presets and modifying it slightly, I was able to get about 0.2 dB of attenuation to smooth out the sound. The compression itself was created with a super subtle ratio and a soft niche setting. I kept the attack and release settings established from the preset since they worked well at creating a smooth and cohesive sound. Next, for maximization, I used the Weiss MM1, which cost $199. By increasing the amount to about 50%, using the wide setting, and making the effect 100% in use, I brought up lower level aspects of the signal. Notice that since we're using the wide mode, which is splitting the signal into mid and side, the mid is the one being compressed more often. This creates a wider sounding signal. Last up, for limiting, I wanted to use the Weiss compressor limiter, which costs $299. So you've probably noticed a theme, which is that Weiss plugins are among some of the most expensive out there, but they still sounded great and added a lot to this chain. Granted, this last limiter seemed to add a lot of unwanted distortion no matter what the settings were, and this seems like a common complaint about this limiter. Regardless, it let me achieve an aggressive sound that still retained a lot of depth. Now, the total cost of all of these plugins came out to $3,024, but does this really make that big of a difference? There are some really great plugins here for sure, but to what extent does that extra money really improve the sound of the master? Let's listen to the full chain, and then you can decide if the cost of the chain was really worth it.
Think the world was ending when we pretend that it's alright, it's alright, it's alright. And if my mind is up in flames, would you stay with me through the night, through the night, through the night? Would you stay, would you stay? Think the world was ending when we pretend that it's alright, it's alright, it's alright. And if my mind is up in flames, would you stay with me through the night, through the night, through the night? Would you stay, would you stay?
Thank you so much for watching. We really hope you enjoyed it. Let us know in the comment section below if you think this chain was worth the money. Also, if you could like and subscribe to the channel, that would be greatly appreciated. Lastly, if you have a mix that you want to hear mastered, send it to us at sageaudio.com. Thanks again. We'll see you in the next video.